Donald Henry Pee Wee Gaskins Jr. was an American serial killer and sexual offender from South Carolina who stabbed, shot, drowned, and poisoned more than a dozen people. Before his convictions for murder, Gaskins had a long history of criminal activities resulting in prison sentences for assault, burglary, and statutory sexual assault. His last arrest was for contributing to the delinquency of a minor 13-year-old Kim Gaskins, who had gone missing in September 1975. During their search for the missing girl, police discovered 8 bodies buried in shallow graves near Gaskins' home in Prospect, South Carolina. In May 1976, a Florence County jury found Gaskins guilty for the murder of one of the 8 victims, Dennis Bellamy, and sentenced him to death by the electric chair. That death sentence was overturned by the South Carolina Supreme Court in February 1978, and rather than face a new trial, Gaskins pled guilty to the murders of Bellamy and 8 other friends and associates. He was given 10 concurrent life sentences to be served at Central Correctional Institution, CCI prison in Columbia, South Carolina. While at CCI, Gaskins brutally murdered Rudolph Tyner, a fellow inmate on death row, using C4 explosive. After his conviction for killing Tyner, he received his second death sentence, which was administered in September 1991. Just before his execution, Gaskins said he killed 110 people, but these statements have been discredited by law enforcement and journalists who allege this was his attempt to gain notoriety. In his sworn testimony as part of a plea agreement to avoid trial for the murder of John Henry Knight, Gaskins was confirmed to have killed 13 people between 1970 and 1975. Of the 15 people total that he murdered during his lifetime, 10 were under age 25 and 6 were teenagers. Donald Henry Gaskins had a troubled early life in Florence County, South Carolina, marked by neglect from his mother and abuse by a male relative. Due to his small stature, he earned the nickname Pee Wee. As an adult, he stood at approximately 5 feet 4 inch or 1.63 meters to 5 feet 5 inch or 1.65 meters and weighed around 130 pounds or 59 kilograms. Gaskins' mother showed little interest in him, and he only learned his given name, Donald, when it was mentioned in his first court appearance. He developed a reputation as a skilled manipulator and con artist, often described as street smart and possessing a sharp sense of humor. In his youth, Gaskins drank kerosene at the age of 1, leading to convulsions until the age of 3. During adolescence, he engaged in a violent crime spree with a group of delinquents, involving burglaries, assaults, and a gang assault. At 13, he was convicted of assaulting a young woman by striking her with an axe during a break-in at her family's home, resulting in a 5-year sentence at the South Carolina Industrial School for White Boys in Florence. There, he suffered sexual assault by fellow inmates. After escaping from the reform school, marrying, and voluntarily returning to serve his sentence, Gaskins was released in 1951 at the age of 18. He briefly worked on a tobacco plantation until his 1953 arrest for attacking a teenage girl with a hammer following an alleged insult. He received a 6-year prison sentence at the South Carolina Penitentiary. During his time there, Gaskins gained respect by killing Hazel Brazel, a feared inmate, claiming self-defense. This led to an additional 3-year sentence for involuntary manslaughter, but Gaskins transitioned from being a victim to an aggressor. He escaped from prison in 1955, hiding in the back of a garbage truck, and later worked with a traveling carnival in Florida, before rearrest and parole in August 1961. Upon his release, Gaskins returned to a life of burglaries and selling stolen property. 2 years after his parole, he was arrested for sexual assault on a 12-year-old girl, but fled while awaiting sentencing. He was eventually rearrested in Georgia and sentenced to 8 years in prison before being paroled once again in November 1968. After his release, he relocated to Sumter, South Carolina, and began working with a roofing company. Gaskins committed a series of heinous acts over the years. His first known non-prison-related victim was a female hitchhiker whom he assaulted and killed in September 1969, disposing of her body in a swamp. Gaskins later claimed that he tortured and mutilated several individuals, both men and women, purely for his pleasure, dubbing them coastal kills. These acts occurred approximately once every 6 weeks as he roamed the American South's coastal highways, seeking to quell his unsettling urges. He used various methods such as stabbing, suffocation, mutilation, and even cannibalism on some of his victims. Gaskins claimed to have killed 80 to 90 such victims, although these statements remain unverified. He mentioned specific instances, including the murders of an African-American couple named Eddie and Bertie Brown in 1972, and a man named Horace Jones in 1974. Despite Gaskins' claims, there is no evidence to support most of his statements about these murders. However, his confirmed victims include: in November 1970, Gaskins killed his niece, Janice Kirby, and her friend Patricia Ann Alsbrook, possibly due to drug-related issues or attempted sexual assault. In 1971 or 1972, he claimed to have poisoned Martha Ann Dix Jr., also known as Clyde, for various reasons, although her remains were lost. In June 1973, Gaskins raped and drowned Doreen Hope Dempsey and her 2-year-old daughter, Robin Michelle Dempsey, driven by racial prejudice. In June 1974, he shot and stabbed Johnny Sellers and Jessie Ruth Judy, as Sellers posed a threat to expose Gaskins' involvement in an auto theft ring, and Judy could have revealed his criminal activities. In February 1975, Gaskins murdered Silas Barnwell Yates, allegedly in a murder-for-hire scheme, and in April 1975, he killed Diane Bellamy Neely and her boyfriend Avery Leroy Howard, with motives linked to threats of exposing his misconduct. Kim Gelkins, age 13, was stabbed to death in an attempt to silence her regarding her abduction and sexual abuse. On October 10, 1975, Gaskins shot Dennis Bellamy and John Henry Knight in the back of the head to prevent them from disclosing his crimes. In 1982, Gaskins was involved in the murder of Rudolph Tyner, who was on death row, following a double murder in 1978. This act was orchestrated by another individual, Tony Chemo, who hired Gaskins to carry it out using explosives. Please note that Gaskins' claims about additional murders have not been substantiated, and his actions reveal a history of extreme violence and cruelty. Donald Henry Gaskins faced his ultimate downfall when he was arrested on November 14, 1975. His criminal associate, Walter Neely, came forward to the police with crucial information. Neely confessed that he knew about Gaskins' involvement in the murders of Dennis Bellamy, aged 28, and Johnny Knight, aged 15. Shockingly, Neely disclosed that Gaskins had confided in him about multiple killings, involving people who had been listed as missing over the previous 5 years. Gaskins had even revealed the burial locations of these victims. On December 4, 1975, Neely assisted law enforcement in locating the gruesome evidence. They uncovered the remains of 8 victims buried near Gaskins' residence in Prospect, South Carolina. Gaskins faced trial for one murder on May 24, 1976, and was swiftly found guilty on May 28. Initially sentenced to death, his punishment was later commuted to life in prison due to changes in South Carolina's capital punishment laws, conforming to U.S. Supreme Court guidelines for death penalty cases in other states. However, Gaskins' brutality didn't end behind bars. On September 2, 1982, he committed another murder within the high-security confines of the South Carolina Correctional Institution. His victim was Rudolph Tyner, a fellow death row inmate who had been convicted of killing an elderly couple during a botched armed robbery. This murder was orchestrated by Tony Chemo, the son of Tyner's victims, who hired Gaskins to carry out the act. Chemo initially faced murder charges, but later pleaded guilty to lesser charges, receiving an 8-year prison sentence before being paroled in 1986. Gaskins attempted to poison Tyner several times before resorting to explosives. He rigged a device, resembling a portable radio, in Tyner's cell, under the pretense of communication between cells. When Tyner followed Gaskins' instructions to hold the speaker to his ear during a specified time, the explosives hidden within it were detonated by Gaskins from his own cell, resulting in Tyner's death. It's worth noting that this case marked a significant moment in South Carolina's history, as it was the first time a white man received a death sentence for the murder of a black man. While on death row, Gaskins claimed responsibility for between 100 and 110 murders, including the shocking murder of Margaret Peg Coutinho, the 13-year-old daughter of South Carolina State Senator James Coutinho, Jr. of Sumter. However, these claims were highly disputed, and no evidence was found to substantiate Gaskins' statements. Ultimately, Donald Henry Gaskins met his end on September 6, 1991, when he was executed in the electric chair at 1:10 a.m. earlier that day. He had attempted to end his own life by slashing his wrists. His final words were, "I'll let my lawyers talk for me. I'm ready to go."